Today's case brings us to the state of Wyoming, situated in the western United States within the Mountain West area. Wyoming shares borders with Montana to the north and northwest, South Dakota and Nebraska to the east, Idaho to the west, Utah to the southwest, and Colorado to the south. Despite being the 10th largest state in terms of area, Wyoming has the second lowest population density, following Alaska. The state's capital and largest city, Cheyenne, is home to just over 65,000 residents. Wyoming's landscape is characterized by the Rocky Mountain ranges and rangelands in the western half, while the eastern half consists of high plains, featuring high-elevation grasslands. The state experiences a division between semi-arid and continental climates, resulting in windier and drier conditions compared to much of the rest of the country. Over half of Wyoming's land is owned by the federal government, often designated for public use. In terms of both acreage and the percentage of a state's land owned by the federal government, Wyoming ranks 6th. Wyoming is renowned for its rich indigenous folklore, awe-inspiring natural surroundings, and magnificent national parks such as Yellowstone and Grand Teton. The state boasts one of the lowest population densities in the nation. Wyoming is also celebrated for its bull riding, cowboy culture, and being home to some of the most breathtaking rangelands on Earth. It is within the borders of Wyoming that the disappearance of Lisa took place in 1988. Lisa Marie Kimmel, the eldest daughter of Sheila and Ronald Kimmel, was born on July 18, 1969 in Covington, Tennessee, and raised in Billings, Montana. After graduating from Billings Senior High School in 1987, Lisa accepted a position as a restaurant manager at an Arby's in Aurora, Colorado, a town near Denver. Sheila Kimmel, Lisa's mother, worked as a regional manager for the restaurant chain, and the two would commute weekly, covering approximately 555 miles between Billings and Denver. Lisa and her mother resided in separate apartments within a Denver apartment building during the week. However, they frequently traveled back to Billings to visit Lisa's father, Ronald, and her other sisters. In the final weekend of March in 1988, Sheila and Lisa made the decision to return to Billings from Denver for a weekend of quality family time. Nevertheless, they opted for different routes as they had distinct plans. Sheila intended to go skiing with her friends, Sherry and Stacy, while Lisa planned to introduce her boyfriend, Ed Jurek, to her family. Consequently, Lisa charted a course to Cody, Wyoming to pick up Ed before heading to Billings, Montana. She chose to take the surface road instead of her usual highway route in order to reach Cody. With the weather conditions being favorable, Lisa should have arrived at Ed's residence late on Friday night, approximately 8 hours after departing. However, she never reached her destination. The following morning, took the initiative to contact the highway patrols multiple times. Subsequently, Wyoming Highway Patrol Officer Alan Lesko disclosed that he had pulled over Lisa for exceeding the speed limit on the night she disappeared. On March 25, 1988, Officer Lesko claimed to have been patrolling in a southbound direction when his radar detected a small vehicle traveling northward at a speed of 88 miles per hour. He swiftly turned his vehicle around and pursued the aforementioned vehicle. Eventually, near Orange Junction, the patrol officer successfully intercepted her. In his official statement, he described her as being well-groomed and possessing the qualities of a respectable daughter. Lisa confirmed her identity by signing the ticket. This interaction marked the last confirmed sighting of Lisa Marie Kimmel. As the week progressed without any communication from her daughter, Lisa's mother began to grow concerned. On March 27, 1988, as tensions escalated, Lisa's father, Ronald Kimmel, arranged for a private plane to search for any signs of the black Honda that Lisa was driving. There was a glimmer of hope that perhaps Lisa had taken a wrong turn and was lost in the vast Wyoming desert. Meanwhile, Sheila, Lisa's mother, tirelessly reached out to as many people as possible, seeking any information that could help bring their daughter back home. The Kimmel family went to great lengths to spread awareness about Lisa's disappearance, creating flyers with her photo and description, and even placing an article in the local newspaper offering a reward for any valuable leads. Initially, this was treated as a missing persons case until a week later on April 2, 1988, when Greg Bradford, a mechanic, stumbled upon Lisa's partially unclothed body floating in the North Platte River in Casper. The sight was horrifying, and it reminded him of the reports he had heard about a missing girl from Montana. Double-checking, he realized with a heavy heart that it was indeed Lisa Marie Kimmel. The entire Kimmel family was devastated by the discovery of Lisa's body, as they had never anticipated such a tragic outcome. Despite their grief, they remained resolute in their pursuit of justice. The Wyoming Police Department spared no effort in investigating the circumstances surrounding Lisa's untimely death. Ed Jurok, Lisa's boyfriend, confirmed that he had spoken to her on the phone around 4:30 p.m. on March 25, 1988. Making him the last person to have contact with her. Lisa had mentioned her plan to reach Cody, Wyoming, to pick Ed up around midnight. Ed also revealed that Lisa's license plate had a personalized touch, displaying the name Lil Miss, a nickname given to her by her grandmother when she was a child. The police meticulously combed through the area where Lisa's body was found, leaving no stone unturned in their search for answers. Approximately a quarter of a mile away on an old highway bridge, authorities found blood that matched Lisa's blood type. The police concluded that the perpetrator likely resided in the area due to the bridge's remote location and infrequent use. Eyewitness accounts of suspicious activities, such as a car on the old government bridge and headlights flashing in the early hours of the morning, led the police to believe that Lisa's murder occurred on March 26th, approximately 5 hours after she was pulled over for speeding. However, the investigation became more challenging as conflicting information started pouring in. Numerous witnesses claimed to have seen Lisa's car, with some even reporting sightings of Lisa herself. Sheriff Ron Ketchum of the Natrona County Sheriff's Department mentioned that over 1,000 people, including police officers, reported seeing the car. There were even alleged sightings in Canada. One of the most credible sightings occurred about 10 hours after Lisa's supposed murder, when Donna Kirkpatrick, the wife of the county sheriff, claimed to have seen Lisa driving a vehicle in Buffalo, Wyoming. Donna described a black sports car with a Montana license plate reading, Little Mississippi. She was convinced that the driver was a young girl, specifically Lisa. Another witness, Diana Houston, reported seeing Lisa in Casper, Wyoming, over 100 miles away from Buffalo. More than a day after the alleged murder, Diana noticed a car with an out-of-state license plate specifically from Montana on a Sunday afternoon. The reason for her noticing it was because she hailed from Montana. The license plate displayed Little Mississippi. Diana, who happened to pass by, observed a driver with blonde hair and a yellow sweater. Lisa was last seen at 9 on Friday night, and her disappearance was reported at 9 on Saturday. Was reportedly sighted 3 times that day, once on Sunday and later on. The investigators were puzzled as to why Lisa hadn't visited her parents' or boyfriend's home if she was still alive. The questions surrounding who was using the vehicle with Lisa's identifiable license plate, assuming she had passed away early on Saturday morning as the police suspected, were troubling. The statements from all these eyewitnesses complicated the investigation. However, the autopsy provided crucial information to the police, shedding light on the events leading to Lisa's demise. Her body showed no signs of decomposition due to the extreme cold. The autopsy revealed that she had been beaten, chained, and assaulted before her death. Additionally, foreign DNA was discovered on her body. Coroner James Thorpen's investigation of Lisa Kimmel's body revealed that she had been repeatedly stabbed and struck on the head. Thorpen estimated that Kimmel had been held captive for approximately 6 days based on the condition of her body when it was found. It was evident that she had endured multiple assaults. Police suspected that Lisa had been murdered at the old government bridge or in its vicinity before being disposed of in the river, as blood matching hers was found on the bridge. Lisa was laid to rest on April 8, 1998, nearly 2 weeks after her disappearance. Over 200 individuals attended her funeral at Sunset Memorial Garden. Her untimely death came as a shock to her family and loved ones. In October of the same year, a family friend visited Lisa's grave and discovered a note that raised further suspicions. The handwritten note was securely attached to the headstone. It read, "Pain never leaves. So hard without you. You will always be alive in me. Your death is my painful loss, but heaven's sweet gain. Love always, Stringfellow Hawk." Lisa's loved ones were completely clueless about the identity of the writer. The incident only added to the enigma surrounding her death. Numerous television programs, including Unsolved Mysteries, dedicated airtime to the perplexing case of the Little Miss murder. However, as time passed, the investigation grew cold due to the lack of substantial suspects or evidence. The case remained an unsolved mystery until 2001, when law enforcement agencies across the United States extensively explored DNA sampling. The DNA recovered from Lisa's body was entered into the system, leading to a moment of elation for the police when it matched the DNA of a man already serving time for multiple charges. The database identified the DNA as belonging to Dale Wayne Eaton, a 57-year-old man from Minetta, Wyoming. Dale had an extensive criminal record, ranging from juvenile correction center stays for assaulting a woman over a watermelon to aggravated assaults on the Breeden family. On September 12, 1997, he had initially stopped to assist the Breeden family, whose car had broken down on a desolate Wyoming highway. However, he proceeded to kidnap them at gunpoint after a short distance. Although he managed to escape from jail 2 months after being detained for this crime, Eaton was eventually recaptured in the Shoshone National Forest 3 months later. His offense was upgraded to a federal felony due to the presence of a weapon, and he was ordered to provide a DNA sample while serving his sentence in a federal prison. Tragically, Eaton committed manslaughter by killing one of his fellow inmates. In 2001, the Little Miss murder case was reevaluated to gain a fresh perspective on the crime. After the discovery of the matching DNA, the previously unsolved case of Lisa Marie Kimmel was reopened, prompting investigators to gather information and evidence to establish Dale as the perpetrator of this heinous crime. Neighbors of Eaton informed investigators that they had witnessed him digging a large trench on his property in Minetta, Wyoming, approximately 75 miles away from Casper. In the summer of 2002, the location was excavated, leading to the discovery of Kimmel's Honda CRX, still bearing her distinctive Little Missus license plate. Subsequently, Eaton faced multiple charges related to the Kimmel case, including first-degree premeditated murder, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated robbery, first-degree assault, and second-degree assault. In April 2003, Dale Wayne Eaton was convicted for the premeditated murder of Lisa and brought to trial in 2004. The trial swiftly concluded as the evidence and testimonies clearly pointed to Dale as the sole perpetrator. The fact that his DNA matched the DNA found on Lisa's body in 1988, coupled with the discovery of her car buried on his property, served as substantial evidence against him. Additionally, a fellow inmate named Joseph Francis Dax testified that Eaton had confessed to the crime. According to Dax's testimony, Eaton accepted Kimmel's offer for a ride, but when she rejected his advances, the situation escalated into kidnapping, assault, and ultimately murder. On March 20, 2004, Eaton was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death. Despite his unsuccessful appeals, Eaton managed to secure a stay of execution in December 2009, just weeks before his scheduled execution in February 2010. In 2014, his death sentence was overturned. Although the state initially intended to pursue the resumption of the death penalty, they withdrew their plea in September 2021. Eaton, who was the sole inmate on Wyoming's death row, was eventually released from his death sentence. On March 25, 2022, Dale Wayne Eaton was informed that he would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of release or commutation. Almost 2 decades after receiving the death penalty, the Kimmel family received compensation in the form of Eaton's property due to a wrongful death case. Unfortunately, the structures were destroyed by fire on July 18, 2005, which coincided with what would have been Lisa Kimmel's 36th birthday. Throughout and after the trial, the Kimmel family expressed their emotions in various ways. Sherry Odegaard, Lisa's sister, believed that the original sentence should have been upheld. Sheila Kimmel, Lisa's mother, requested that Eaton take a closer look at her and her daughters, emphasizing that he had neglected to do so in the past. The entire Kimmel family engaged with Eaton and his legal team. Sherry, in particular, disputed the defense's assertion that Eaton had a traumatic background and possessed the mental strength to endure a death penalty hearing. His health issues and difficult upbringing do not excuse his actions. Sherry stated. Both Dale and his defense attorney, Sean O'Brien, understood what was right and wrong. She emphasized, calling out the attorney for supporting a criminal like Dale. According to Lisa's younger sister, Stacy Pitts, Eaton cannot be considered a victim simply because of his declining health. He is still a criminal. It feels incredibly unjust that Dale Wayne Eaton receives 3 meals a day. Initially, Eaton did not intend to speak. However, his attorney Sean O'Brien claimed that Eaton asked him to apologize on his behalf after their conversation. Nevertheless, the family did not accept the apology as it did not come directly from Eaton himself. The Kimmel family members expressed a sense of finality, but not closure. Sheila Kimmel remarked, "This marks the end of another chapter in a long book. Hopefully it will be the last chapter." A young woman vanished from sight after pulling into the school's parking lot to attend a sporting event. Soon, everyone was in for a very unsettling discovery, and the police were called in to investigate. Detectives worked on this eerie mystery for a total of 28 years, and none of them had any idea that this would be the first case of its kind. On June 12, 1975, Sarah Yarborough was born in Portland. Her parents relocated to the town of Federal Way in another state not too long after. It is practically a suburb of Seattle and is located close to it. Along with having 2 brothers, was very close to her younger brother and assisted her parents in caring for him. Sarah had a background in ballet and music from a young age. The girl always wanted to get into a reputable college, so she worked hard in school. She took part in the school program and flew twice to New Zealand because of her academic performance. Sarah afterwards joined the cheerleading squad at her school. She was a compassionate and non-judgmental individual who tried to assist anyone in need, and she had a large number of friends. When Sarah was 16 years old, her cheerleading squad got together for an event on Saturday morning, December 14th, 1991. They were all together at the school building, waiting for the bus to come get them. Sarah was the only one who misjudged the time when she drove to school in her father's car. The bus was not supposed to arrive until 9 in the morning, but she mistakenly believed it would pick them up at 8. Gradually, all of her friends began to show up, but none of them noticed Sarah. When the bus carrying the students arrived, some of the students noticed a car in the parking lot, but the young woman was not there. While her friends found this odd, nobody was able to get in touch with Sarah because none of them had cell phones at the time. 2 boys, age 12, were strolling around the school premises at approximately the same moment. They saw a strange man as they strolled through the wood area behind the school tennis courts. He emerged from behind some bushes, gave them a strange look, and turned to leave. The kids think he is strange, but they ignored him and continued on. A startling scene was waiting for them a short distance away. A young woman, lifeless and lying on the ground. The school children ran home to tell their parents they thought she had died. The father of one of the boys chose to follow the suspicious man that the kids had spotted, while the parents of the other boy accompanied him to the location. His son informed him that he witnessed a vehicle that appeared to be a Chevrolet Nova leaving that location. His father made the decision to go outside and attempt to locate that car because he lived close to the school. He was able to locate a car that looked similar at one point, but it vanished from his view quickly, making it impossible for him to locate it again. The parents of the other boy arrived at the school in the meantime and saw that the girl on the ground was most likely dead. They hurried to the school building right away and dialed 911. When the police arrived, they were able to confirm that the young lady had passed away. It did not take them long to ascertain that Sarah was the deceased. The officers deduced that the victim had most likely been strangled based on the marks on her neck. There were only a few of her possessions, a jacket, underwear, and socks, near the body. Officers suspect that the attacker may have attacked her right next to the car and then dragged her behind the trees because they discovered her purse and car keys inside the vehicle in the school parking lot. After transferring the body to the medical examiners, the police started searching for any hints. Interviewing everyone who was on or close to the school grounds was their initial step. The man that had emerged from behind the bushes close to Sarah's body was roughly described by the 2 guys who discovered her. They described him as a tall man in his early 20s, dressed in black pants, a dark raincoat and shoulder-length blonde hair. The police soon located another witness, and when they did, they discovered an extremely shocking tale. In the same forested area, a man going for a jog came upon an odd sight. The witness believed that a couple had simply chosen to have some privacy as the young woman lay motionless next to the bushes with a man hovering over her. The man and the young woman were still there when he ran the opposite way down the same road a short while later. He did not feel that he was witnessing a crime being committed in either of the two instances. The witness himself told the police that he did not know what behavior was typical in his new country because he had just recently immigrated to the United States from another culture. Still, the witness gave the police a general description of the murderer that matched the kid's story of how the body was found. Several dozen more people who had been in the vicinity of the school were questioned by detectives, but no more pertinent leads were discovered. Meanwhile, doctors examined Sarah's body and determined that her death was caused by strangulation. It appears that the offender used her own underwear, and the young lady's head has sustained a significant injury. Assuming that the victim lost consciousness from this blow, the experts concluded that the story of the runner was true. He noticed that the young lady on the ground remained motionless. Upon examining Sarah's clothing, forensic investigators discovered remnants of the same male DNA on nearly every article. However, in 1991, there was no shared DNA database, so the only method the investigators had was to compare the DNA samples of particular suspects directly. An additional detail was brought to the detectives' notice. The medical examiner reported that there were no indications of assault on Sarah's body, despite the fact that forensic scientists discovered male DNA residue on her clothing. After obtaining all of this data, investigators developed their own theories about what transpired. Sarah was the only one in the parking lot when she arrived at the school nearly an hour early. Sarah's attacker most likely saw her there, waited for the girl to exit the vehicle, struck her in the head with an object, and caused her to pass out. After that, he dragged her out of the parking lot and behind the trees, where her body was discovered later. After stripping off some of her clothes and abusing her, the offender strangled the victim with her own stockings. Detectives were disappointed to learn that the driver of the Chevrolet Nova, which they had searched for after one of the children who discovered Sarah's body, had informed them about the vehicle in which the perpetrator had allegedly fled the scene and actually just finished delivering donuts that morning. He gave a sample of his DNA, which did not match what was on Sarah's clothing. Seemingly, the children only noticed the vehicle traveling beside them and assumed the culprit was at the wheel. Alas, none of the boys could remember for certain whether they saw a man coming from the bushes toward any car. Police continued to look for witnesses and fresh leads over the following few days, but they did not make any noteworthy progress. Classes resumed on Monday despite the fact that everyone was appalled by what had transpired. Not only had the murder occurred a short distance from their school, but the perpetrator was still at large and nobody knew who he was. The male athletes made plans to accompany each student to the vehicle or bus so that they would not be left on the streets, since the young ladies were scared to stroll the premises by themselves. Detectives interviewed each of the roughly 70 possible witnesses they identified that morning in and around the school, but they were unable to obtain any additional information. A rough picture of the murderer was put together and sent to all of the local newspapers and television stations based on the testimony of the two children and the jogger. Numerous media outlets covered the story, and in the weeks that followed, the police received hundreds of tips. Investigators looked into each one, but they all came to a standstill. They once had a tip regarding a man with a criminal past who fit the killer's description. However, there was a setback for the detectives. His DNA did not match that of the offender. The case has been on hold for several months since then. The police attempted to follow up on each of the roughly 4,000 leads they have received in total, but their resources were simply insufficient to handle the volume of data. Time also worked against them, since new cases needed to be looked into every month while investigators looked for the offender. When Sarah's family discovered that the police did not have enough resources to handle all of the tips, her grandfather attempted to assist as much as he could. He was employed by a technology company, and he persuaded management to temporarily donate a $100,000 computer with extreme processing power to the police department. Even though it was an enormous amount in the 1990s, management approved of it. Police officers could process leads more quickly, sort them into an easy-to-read format, and store all the information about the leads in one location with this computer. In spite of everything, they were unable to follow any lead, and in the years that followed, they made no progress. Saro's classmates graduated 2 years later, and before they did, they decided to honor their friend. They were able to raise a substantial amount of money, which they used to build a memorial. It was a bench with metal castings of Sarah's belongings on it. A picture of the young woman's dog reaching for her purse was placed next to these items. The case was repeatedly reopened in the years that followed, and all the evidence was once again examined, but the outcome remained the same. They still had not been able to apprehend the offender. The police conducted thousands of interviews and collected DNA samples from almost 300 potential suspects during this time, but their findings were all ambiguous. 20 years after the murder, in 2011, the new detective made the decision to use contemporary technology. He was made aware of a business that started doing genetic genealogy research. When the policeman asked if they could try to find the relatives of the person whose DNA was found on the victim's body, the experts took up the task. Sadly, they were unsuccessful. First of all, in 2011, genetic genealogy was only beginning to gain popularity, and the experts' knowledge was quite restricted. For instance, they do not know how to look for both male and female relatives in the same sample. They could only search for family ties with other men if they shared a man's DNA, and vice versa. Second, a number of laws that forbade the use of genetic data samples find relatives of suspects presented them with yet another challenge. It bore some interesting fruit. Firstly, the group of scientists that the investigator had contacted had already spent a number of years assembling a genetic genealogy of the original settlers who arrived in America in 1620 from Great Britain aboard the Mayflower. They learned that the assassin of Sarah was related to Robert Fuller, a passenger on the ship, through analyzing his DNA. But it was nearly impossible to track him down in this chain, particularly during those years. Although there were only a little more than 100 passengers on the ship, more than 25 million people have descended from them over the ages. Second, the detectives were unaware that he had made the Sarah Yarbrough case the first of its kind. Although his idea was not successful, it was the first crime of that was attempt to be solved using genetic genealogy. Using what information he could find, the detective located multiple men living in the town's vicinity at the time of Sarah's murder, who shared the father's surname. He found pictures of them and went up to the two men who found the body when they were kids and the jogger who was one of the witnesses. Sadly, neither of them was able to identify the murderer in the picture. At last, the investigators requested DNA samples from every Fuller in the vicinity, which they then sent to a lab. Even though none of them matched the murderer's DNA, an intriguing thing happened in this case. In fact, one of those men was a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from that very ship, as the experts proved. He was undoubtedly not the murderer, though, and he was also unaware that any distant relatives resided nearby. He might have been related to the offender so distantly that their family was unaware of the relationship. In 2017, the detective retired and a new team took up the case. Investigators returned to the company that had taken the killer's DNA sample in 2011. By then, genetic material analysis had progressed significantly, and specialists decided to attempt determining the offender's ancestry. It took 2 entire years. Key experts manually attempted to trace the killer's family ties and get in touch with people who were living in Federal Way at the time of Sarah's death by searching through public databases for even the most distant relatives of the murderer. Ultimately, they had to eliminate thousands of candidates before they struck it lucky. Experts concluded that there was a good chance the DNA sample from Sarah's clothing belonged to one of the two brothers. One was 33 years old and the other was 27 at the time of the murder. The older one proved to be a felon with a noteworthy criminal history. Since his DNA sample was in the FBI database and he had served time in prison for violent crimes, it was evident that he was not involved in Sarah's murder. If he had been, his DNA would have matched evidence from the 1990s regarding Patrick Nicholas, the younger brother. The police had him under suspicion for violent crimes, including crimes against minors, but that was before the criminal's DNA samples were entered into the database. Detectives set up a surveillance system for the man right away. He was 55 years old and lived in Wellington, a nearby town. After 2 days of the police observing everything he did, the chance finally arrived. After going to the laundry, Patrick went outside to smoke and threw his cigarette butt on the ground while he waited for his clothes to be washed. Without delay, a police officer placed it in an evidence bag and went back to his vehicle. The second time Patrick went outside to smoke, a red handkerchief fell out of his pocket. The man did not pick it up and returned to the laundry room. The police were happy to collect the second piece of evidence, in case the experts could not obtain a sample of DNA from the butt of the cigarette. But the specialists were able to take samples from each of these things with ease, and the following day they gave the detective the much-awaited update. The DNA of Patrick and the DNA discovered on Sarah's clothing in 1991 matched exactly. The man was taken into custody by the police after the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant for him. From the time investigators learned his name to the formal filing of murder charges, it all took 5 days. Many asked the very reasonable question, why was a man with such a criminal history not even considered a suspect for all those 28 years? After his biography was leaked to the media, Patrick Nicholas, then 19 years old, tried to assault a young woman after approaching her and getting into her car. The victim was able to get away, but not before having to jump into the river and swim a considerable distance to get away from the attacker safely. After serving 4 years in jail, Patrick was allowed to leave. In 1994, he attempted to abuse a young woman who was underage, which led to his next arrest by the police. Although he was arrested once more, no database had his DNA on file. That has a peculiar explanation. The article for which he was prosecuted was not difficult enough to obtain DNA, and the police never came across his name in 3 decades. Additionally, he was absent from all 4,000 leads that were gathered over time. It also revealed the reason why specialists in genetic genealogy were unable to link them to Robert Fuller. As it turned out, Patrick's biological grandfather was raised under the adopter family name after being adopted. One of the men who found Sarah's body when they were kids in 1991 declared right away that Patrick was the murderer. He acknowledged that the experience had left a lasting impression on him. When the body was found, he was just 12 years old and the murderer had seen his face. The witness had been living in constant fear Patrick would kill him for years, and he did not feel safe. Until Patrick's arrest. The trial for Patrick did not start until 2023. He maintained his innocence and his attorney attempted to refute the primary piece of evidence, the DNA test. He believed that the fact that Patrick's sperm was found on the young woman's cloth did not establish his guilt, but this argument was rejected. The attorney also attempted to dispute the validity of the DNA analysis itself, but the experts ruled that these arguments were wholly unfounded. Ultimately, Patrick was determined to have committed first-degree murder without intending to kill. He was essentially given no chance of ever being released from prison when he was sentenced to 45 years and 8 months on May 25th. Patrick was unmoved at the pronouncement of the sentence. Sarah's relatives also addressed the judge, thanking everyone involved in the trial and the investigators for bringing the killer to justice after he had evaded justice for 28 years. On September 12, 1988, Lawrence, Massachusetts was rocked to its core by a tragic event. The lifeless body of an 11-year-old girl named Melissa Tremblay was discovered brutally stabbed to death and abandoned on the train tracks near the Boston and Maine Railway Yard. This senseless act of violence left the community in a state of shock, anger, and profound sadness. The question on everyone's mind was, who could commit such a heinous act? The search for justice would span 35 years before the perpetrator was finally apprehended. Nestled along the picturesque banks of the Merrimack River, Lawrence is a vibrant and thriving city that seamlessly blends small-town charm with the excitement of a bustling metropolis. The heartbeat of the city is fueled by its diverse and passionate residents, whose unwavering pride and love for their community can be felt in every corner. As you stroll through the bustling streets of Lawrence, a palpable sense of history and heritage permeates the air, as if the very bricks and stones whisper tales of the past. Lawrence holds a significant place in American labor history, as it was here that the historic Bread and Roses strike of 1912 unfolded, marking a turning point in the fight for workers' rights and social justice. However, amidst this rich tapestry of history, tragedy struck in 1988. Melissa Tremblay, born in 1977 to her mother, Janet Tremblay in Ceylon, Massachusetts, fell victim to a horrific crime. Raised by her single mother, Janet Melissa, affectionately known as Missy, attended Lancaster School and was adored by her peers. Described as a carefree, fun-loving, and compassionate little girl, she had a wide circle of friends and always brought joy to those around her. Lalisa's favorite playground was the Boston and Maine Railway Yard, where she would spend countless hours running and playing amidst the train tracks while her mother visited friends at a nearby social club. Tragically, it was in this very place that her life was cut short, forever altering the lives of those who loved her. On September 11, 1988, Nalisa accompanied her mother and her boyfriend to the La Salle Social Club in Lawrence, not far from the railway. While the adults stayed inside, Nalisa went outside to play. The last sightings of her life were reported by a railroad employee and a pizza delivery driver who were in the vicinity during the late afternoon hours of that day. When Janet realized her daughter was missing, she frantically searched the area before reporting her disappearance to the police at around 9 p.m. that night. Janet returned home in a state of panic, desperately hoping for news of her daughter's safety. Tragically, she would never receive such news. On the morning of September 12, 1988, Melissa's lifeless body was discovered in the Old Boston and Maine Railway Yard in Lawrence. She had been brutally stabbed to death, and her leg was amputated post-mortem when a train ran over her body. Detectives theorized that the killer had intentionally mutilated the body in an attempt to remove any potential physical evidence. The state police and Lawrence police launched an extensive investigation into Melissa's murder, thoroughly searching the railroad yard and other locations, including the Lancaster Grammar School, where Melissa was a student. The community was shocked and devastated by the heinous crime that had occurred in their small town. Leading the case was Lawrence Police Officer Detective Thomas Murphy, who was appalled by the brutality of the murder. Determined to bring justice for Melissa, Detective Murphy and his team collected physical evidence from the crime scene and the victim's body, although the specific nature of this evidence was never disclosed. However, the forensic team analyzing the body could determine that the stab wounds indicated the killer was left-handed. Since no arrests were made at the time, it is presumed that the evidence collected was not viable for the investigation, leading to its shelving until forensic technology advanced enough to utilize it. The police interviewed numerous witnesses, suspects, and persons of interest, but the only lead they discovered was a suspicious-looking van in the vicinity of Melissa's location on the day of her murder. Unfortunately, further inquiries failed to yield any information about the van or its owner. Despite their exhaustive efforts, the police were unable to apprehend Melissa's killer, leaving the community in fear while her family and friends mourned their devastating loss. As time passed, no new leads emerged and the case remained unsolved, eventually growing cold. However, in 2014, authorities decided to re-examine the cold case, led by Lieutenant Peter Sherver. After reviewing the old case files and the evidence left behind from the initial investigation, the detectives knew they had to take action. Several years later, the evidence recovered from Melissa's body was submitted for testing, and in 2022, after 33 years, the detectives finally had a suspect. On April 26, 2022, Marvin McClendon Jr., a 74-year-old former Massachusetts corrections officer, was arrested in his home in Bremen, Alabama by the Alabama State Police for Melissa's murder. Although the specific details of the evidence used to establish his guilt were not disclosed to the public, the press release did mention that the evidence recovered from the body played a crucial role in identifying him as a suspect. As detectives delved deeper into McClendon's life, a series of incriminating details came to light. McClendon, a former employee of the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, was not working for the state in 1988. He had worked for the department on 3 separate occasions between 1970 and 2002. However, during the time of the murder, he was involved in carpentry work in Chelmsford, a locality near Lawrence. Investigators discovered that McClendon had several connections to Lawrence, the nearby town where the young girl's lifeless body was found near a set of train tracks. Their investigation revealed that McClendon frequented various locations within Lawrence, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Salam Street. Additionally, he owned a van that resembled the one witnesses saw Melissa near on the day she disappeared. These findings shed light on McClendon's proximity to the murder location, prompting further inquiry into his potential involvement in the crime. In 1988, McClendon, then 41 years old, had gained a reputation for having an uncontrollable temper and displaying violent and aggressive behavior when under the influence of alcohol. He was known to frequently visit strip clubs, engaging in inappropriate and disrespectful activities towards women. Furthermore, he was involved in sexual relations with women in the back of his van, further tarnishing his image. These facts were previously presented in a court hearing by his brother, Strasnick. Mr. McClendon was represented by a court-appointed attorney, Mr. Fassold, during his trial following his arrest. However, during a hearing, a probation employee testified that Mr. McClendon did not meet the criteria for appointed counsel. During the hearing concerning Henry Fassold's motion to dismiss, McClendon's defense attorney, his own brother Strasnick, presented arguments against the motion. He provided evidence countering Fassold's claim that the DNA evidence collected was insufficient to support a first-degree murder indictment against McClendon. According to court documents, McClendon's lawyer highlighted that his client willingly provided a DNA sample to investigators during his initial interview with Lieutenant Peter Sherver of the Massachusetts State Police, which occurred in Alabama in 2021. Despite using a walker, McClendon managed to make his way into Salem's Superior Court on Tuesday, where he sat beside his attorney, Fassold. In April 2022, during a subsequent interview conducted by authorities, McClendon vehemently denied any involvement in Melissa's tragic demise. He maintained his innocence and even suggested that he may have been the victim of a meticulously orchestrated plot by inmates from the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, where he had previously worked. This statement not only attempted to shift blame, but also aimed to mislead the authorities. Strasnick emphasized that the DNA evidence collected from the crime scene matched the DNA profile of a male relative of McClendon, making it highly unlikely that it belonged to anyone else. Furthermore, he argued that the DNA evidence was just one piece of the puzzle, as there were other factors supporting the indictment against his brother. McClendon's attempts to absolve himself of responsibility did not end there. He proceeded to shift blame onto his own brother, Strasnick, displaying a treacherous betrayal and a willingness to sacrifice anyone to protect himself. His efforts to portray his own relatives as the mastermind behind the crime revealed a great deal about his disloyalty and lack of trustworthiness. He vehemently disputed the notion that his brother was factually innocent, presenting evidence of McClendon's erratic behavior, leading up to and following the murder, arguing that these actions indicated guilt. Additionally, he highlighted McClendon's history of violence, making him a plausible suspect in the murder case. Fassold's statement suggested that the investigation focused on McClendon rather than his family members due to specific evidence available at the time, such as McClendon's left-handedness, potential connections to Lawrence, ownership of a van in 1988, lifestyle and interactions with law enforcement during the investigation. However, this explanation seems suspicious, potentially serving as an effort to absolve Mr. McClendon of any wrongdoing and could be seen as a calculated and deceptive move. During the court proceedings, Judge Salim Tabet presided over a motion seeking to dismiss the case against the defendant, Mr. McClendon, who had been accused of first-degree murder. The judge attentively listened to the arguments presented in the motion and decided to carefully consider the matter before making a final decision. It is important to highlight that the charge of first-degree murder is an extremely serious offense, carrying the potential penalty of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Consequently, this case is being closely monitored by all parties involved, and the outcome of the upcoming hearing is expected to significantly impact the course of the trial. Despite Fassold's unsuccessful attempts to secure McClendon's release on a $50,000 bond, he remains detained without bond at Middleton Jail. Fassold also emphasized that there were no eyewitnesses to Tremblay's murder and no evidence suggesting that McClendon had any connection or motive to harm her. Nevertheless, McClendon is currently held in protective custody within a cell of Middleton Jail. As part of this confinement, he is only allowed to leave his cell when accompanied by a guard. This precautionary measure has been implemented to ensure McClendon's safety and the safety of others, considering the high-profile nature of the case and the potential risks associated with his involvement. By keeping him in protective custody, authorities can closely monitor his movements and interactions, thereby preventing any potential harm or disturbances within the jail or beyond. According to Sherry Carrickman, a friend of Melissa who attended McClendon's arraignment, she was merely 10 years old when the crime took place. When she saw the defendant in court, she perceived him differently from what she had imagined. Melissa's family spokesperson, Danielle Root, conveyed that McClendon was described as an elderly and fragile individual. Shocking me, Melissa's lifeless body was discovered in a train yard in Lawrence on September 12, 1988, a day after she was reported missing. The family never anticipated that it would take over 3 decades for someone to be apprehended and brought to trial for Melissa's murder. Nevertheless, despite the lengthy delay, the family remains optimistic that the district attorney's office will exhibit the same level of commitment as the detectives who tirelessly pursue the suspect, Marvin McClendon. According to a statement, Root stated that there had been a lot of emotion since the end of April when they were informed of the arrest, ranging from excitement to sadness to frustration and all over the place. They were thrilled to see the suspect in jail, but also very saddened that some of their family members, such as their aunt, grandfather, and others, were not alive to witness him facing justice. The statement went on to express gratitude to the police for their ongoing efforts throughout the years and for the use of DNA technology that was not originally available to work the case. Root finished by saying that their family was looking forward to the case, moving forward to the grand jury for indictment, and then on to the Superior Court to finally see justice served. 22-year-old Kyle Clinkscales lived in LaGrange, Georgia in 1976. The sports-obsessed young man was attending Auburn University in Alabama. At the university, he was beginning to search for his place in the world and mapping out what career to pursue. On January 27, 1976, Kyle left his part-time job at a bar in LaGrange and headed out for the roughly 45 minutes drive to Auburn University, where he was a sophomore. Kyle never made it to the university. When his parents could not get in contact with him, he was reported missing. Nothing out of the ordinary was found at Kyle's apartment to suggest that he ran away or had moved elsewhere. Investigators believed that something happened at some point on his trip. They just did not know what it could be. The Troup County Sheriff's Office and Kyle's parents intensively searched for him in those initial weeks after he went missing. Lakes were drained. Rewards were promised. Deputies searched woodlands for a single clue. For Kyle's parents, John and Louise Clinkscales, the effort was a passionate, all-consuming quest, mirroring scores of other missing person cases across the country. With loved ones pleading for tips, searchers growing weary with each unsuccessful venture, and members of an exhausted community looking on aghast that something so haunting could have happened to one of their own. The determination was the source of admiration for many. Kyle Clinkscales had always liked New Orleans, so his parents bought ads in the city, asking for help to find their son. He loved Hawaii when he visited on some vacation as a boy, so his parents sent letters to every police department in the state. And when tips came in that a person had been found matching his description, strong jaw, shaggy brown hair, thick eyebrows, they drove to the places where those tips originated. 2 years after their son's disappearance, the Clinkscales had distributed nearly 5,000 bumper stickers seeking information. They became supporters for families of others who had missing relatives and tried to call attention to cases not as well publicized. The Clinkscales were among those invited to the White House in 1985 to meet with President Ronald Reagan about ways to address the issue of missing and exploited children in their home, the same one where Kyle Clinkscales had been raised and that was decorated with pictures of him. His parents' drive to find their son would sometimes give way to fatigue. In an interview in 1978, John Clinkscales expressed unease. He said maybe his son, who did not really like college, had felt like he was a financial burden on his parents. Instead of dropping out or sharing his feelings, he might just have wanted to make it easier on us by disappearing, John said. Every time Louise and John Clinkscales left their home in LaGrange, Georgia, to search for him, one of them would leave behind a note if their son returned while they were gone. They wanted him to know that a lot had changed since he was last seen in 1976. They loved him, the Clinkscales would write, and there on the dining room table was a spare car key for him. Both John and Louise Clinkscales submitted their DNA samples to investigators for testing, in case their son's remains were ever found. Sadly, John Clinkscales passed away in 2007. Louise passed away in January 2021, at the age of 92. A driver in Casita, Alabama, about 30 miles southwest of La Grange, was on a two-lane road on December 7, 2021, when he saw the hatchback of a rusted vehicle sticking out of the creek and called the authorities. It was a 1974 Ford Pinto poking out from the creek. There were human remains inside the rusty car and about 50 skeletal fragments encased in the mud. It was not clear what allowed the car to become visible from the road after all this time. In February 2023, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the remains belonged to Kyle Clinkscales. The creek where the car was found in Chambers County, Alabama, outside of La Grange, was never searched because the road would not likely have been Kyle's main route to Auburn, though it might have been an alternate one. Aaron Hackley, the coroner in Truppy County, said that it might take investigators months to determine the exact cause if they can pinpoint one at all, given the age of the remains. Hackley said when she got the call from investigators that the remains had been identified, she called Kyle's aunt, Martha Morrison, who responded with relief and regret that his parents were not alive to hear the news. Martha added there were very strong Christians. They had faith that things would work out for them and they never gave up hope. When the remains of Kyle Clinkscales are returned to his relatives, we plan to drive to Shadowlawn Cemetery in La Grange. There, in the soft dirt between the graves of his mother and father, he will be buried, nestled in a space set aside years ago. Indianapolis Metropolitan Police revealed a significant development in a cold case that spanned nearly 5 decades, involving 3 hitchhiking girls and a man described by detectives at the time as a predator. The mysterious perpetrator responsible for the brutal assaults on the young girls in a field was unmasked during a press conference, finally providing closure to the investigation that had haunted the city for years. Thomas Edward Williams, known as the Slasher by both law enforcement and the victims, passed away at the age of 49 in November 1983 while incarcerated in Galveston, Texas. At the time of the abduction, Williams resided near the location where the kidnapping took place. In 1975, 3 girls hitchhiked along the 800 block of East Washington Street in an attempt to reach an amusement center. Upon realizing that something was amiss, when the man who picked them up had removed the inside door handle of the front passenger door, they soon found themselves in grave danger. The man, believed to be in his 40s, drove the girls past their intended destination and into Hancock County, eventually veering off onto a county road and into a cornfield. It was there that he sexually assaulted the youngest girl, who was only 11 years old at the time, stabbing her 3 times in the throat and 15 times in the chest. Subsequently, he slit the throats of the 13-year-old and 14-year-old before leaving them all for dead. I heard him moving around. Then the car door closed and the engine started, recounted the eldest victim during an interview in February 2018. I was trying to figure out which direction he was heading because I wanted to escape, but the 13-year-old grabbed my leg, causing me to fall. I couldn't tell which way he went. The 2 older victims were unable to locate the youngest victim, who happened to be the sister of the eldest victim. The man had dragged her further into the field. He lifted me up and threw me into the cornfield, recounted the youngest victim. The 2 older victims managed to crawl out of the field and onto US 40 in an effort to flag down help. 3 men stopped to assist them, transporting them to a motel and contacting the authorities. One officer who arrived at the motel scene first compared the cuts on the girls' necks to the appearance of an accordion. Subsequently, law enforcement returned to the field in search of the youngest victim. A manhunt for the assailant ensued for several years, with newspaper clippings sharing leads and providing suspect sketches based on the girls in a news article. A police detective stated that the sketch matched the description of a suspect known for abducting and sexually assaulting girls from East Side schools. At that time, the Marion County Sheriff assigned 12 detectives to the case. In December 1975, approximately 4 months after the attacks, Marion County prosecutors identified a Homer man as a suspect, although no charges were filed. The search continued, but eventually the case went cold. In 2018, Steve Gibbs, a detective sergeant with the Marion County Sheriff's Office, took on the cold case and described the assailant as a hunter of victims, stating, "There's no getting out." On January 9, 2019, the women underwent DNA swabbing under the supervision of Sergeant David Ellison, who had taken over the case. They visited the city-county building to provide their DNA samples for comparison against the evidence. Without disclosing any details, Indianapolis police announced in a news release that it was through DNA analysis that they were led to the suspect. Following a collaboration between Indianapolis Police, AudioChuck, and DNA Labs International, Deputy Chief Kendall Adams of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department addressed the three women, expressing his hope that this would be the first step in providing closure through the criminal justice system. During the news conference, Mrs. Rotlertrick stated that she had chosen to forgive Mr. Williams for the attack, acknowledging that her decision might not be well received by everyone. Mrs. Smith was the final woman to address the audience. She expressed that the confirmation of Mr. Williams' identity had provided her with a sense of closure and had delivered justice to her family. "It has brought peace to my heart," she stated. Today's case takes us to Bradford, England, home to 20-year-old Samaya Begum. Samaya was a bright, hard-working young woman who was a biomedical science student at Leeds Beckett University. She also worked part-time as a carer for the elderly and disabled. It was a job she loved. She posted to social media saying, "The management are so supportive and encouraging. Overall, I'm ecstatic to be a part of this team." Samaya was someone who kept to herself and was described by neighbors as being quiet, but she excelled at university. She passed her first year with excellent marks and displayed a fantastic set of academic skills and a great dedication to her studies. Finally, after years of turmoil, things appeared to be on the up for her. Samaya was from a large but very fractured family that had been torn apart by a feud that had been going on for years. At the age of 16, Samaya had gone to the police. She had been promised to someone in marriage by her parents. It was someone she didn't want to marry, one of her cousins in Pakistan. Her father, Yassine, had threatened her with violence if she didn't agree to it, so she made the immensely brave decision to go to the authorities. A forced marriage protection order was taken out on the 7th of September 2020. This applied to her and her siblings. A forced marriage protection order can stop someone from being forced to enter into a marriage or from being taken out of the country. It can also help return someone to the United Kingdom if they have been taken abroad. Following this, all of the children were removed from the home. She then moved into a house on Binney Street with her paternal grandmother and her uncle Dawood Khan. Moving out and living at 32 Binney Street gave Samaya the freedom and independence she wanted, now that she was away from Yassine. She could eat what she wanted, dress in the clothes that she liked, see her friends as she pleased, and watch what she wanted on television. One of her relatives would later say that she had actually been homeschooled for several years and forbidden from going to university. Living here meant she was also free to continue her education. The 25th of June, 2022. Samaya had been on a late shift at work and was captured on CCTV walking home at 4 minutes past midnight. As morning came, it was a normal day in Bradford. At 3:35 p.m., Samaya sent a message to one of her closest friends. The friend later replied at 4:40 p.m., sending Samaya of a video of rain out of the window. She sent the message on WhatsApp, but it didn't deliver. Her friend didn't think too much of it, believing that maybe Samaya's phone battery had died. But her friend grew more concerned as time went on and sent another message to Samaya saying, "Can you text me when you get this, please?" She still heard nothing. The following day, she contacted Samaya's family to see if they had heard from her, and she was told that a missing persons report had already been filed. When Samaya's uncle Dawood had got back to the house on the day Samaya had last been seen, he said the front door was unlocked, which was very unusual. Upon entering the property, he found Samaya's uncle and his brother, Mohammed Taruz Khan, in the house at 6:30 p.m. He asked him what he was doing there, as Mohammed was not actually allowed to be at the house, as he was abusive and violent. Mohammed had a long criminal record and several convictions. He had been convicted on June 23, 2016 of battery against his own daughter after he had used a knife to threaten her. saying he would chop her up as he had found out that she had been contacting boys. A restraining order had also been taken out in 2016 to prevent Muhammad from having any contact with his mother or going to her house, 32 Binney Street. The hours ticked by, but there was nothing from Samaya. This was very unusual for her. Whenever she went out, she would always be sure to tell Dawood and her grandmother where she was going and for how long she would be gone. Dawood began calling her and left her a message, as did her aunt, but there was still no response from her. As the panic really started to set in, Dawood again tried contacting his niece. At 11 minutes past midnight, her aunt also called her again, but still could not get a response. The calls to Samaya's phone carried on throughout the morning and afternoon. At 1:15 p.m., Dawood reported her as missing to the police. West Yorkshire police attempted to make contact with her and called her phone several times, but just like everyone else, they too got no response and their calls went straight to voicemail. They also attempted to contact her uncle Muhammad, who had been at the house that day, but he too was not responding. Also that day, officers were out on patrol, and at 5:44 p.m., the message came through that there was a high-risk missing person that they needed to begin looking for. They were asked to go to a shipping container at 1A Cartergate Works, where 53-year-old Muhammad had lived since November 2021. As they arrived at his address, he was hanging his washing out and waved at them as they drove past. The unit he lived in was small and compact, 30 feet long and 9 feet wide, with another unit stacked on top of it. Parked outside was his Mitsubishi space wagon. The officers asked him why he had failed to respond to numerous calls the police had made to him. He said he had just been busy. He also said that he had been to Binney Street the day before to give his mother some fruit, arriving at the house at around 2 p.m. The door was locked, so he had called Samaya to get her to unlock and open the door for him. He said that Samaya was not in the living room when he left, and that he didn't see her. As the search for Samaya continued, the police began tracing the movements of her uncle Muhammad. And after trawling through the surveillance footage, Muhammad was seen on CCTV at 1:52 p.m., arriving on Binney Street on the 25th of June. One of the officers from West Yorkshire Police was tasked with listening to the audio from the CCTV cameras on Binney Street. The officer was able to hear a male voice saying, "Get the F*** out of my face, and then I'm coming back." Footsteps and running could be heard. Before the man said, "Come back, come here," the female voice could then be heard saying, "Lock the door." This wasn't the only concerning evidence they had found. They had observed Muhammad's car later driving around. He had parked on Mill Lane and removed what appeared to be a large and heavy item from his car before dragging it away. At 5 p.m. on the 27th of June, Muhammad Khan was arrested on suspicion of kidnap. When the officers questioned him, he was quick to say that he had a bad memory, but in spite of the severity of the allegation against him, he appeared to be very relaxed. He said that his relationship with his niece was generally good. As the officers continued to talk to him, at 7:30 p.m. that day, other officers went to 32 Binney Street to conduct a search and take photographs of the property. Later that evening, they went to 1A Cartergate Works, where Muhammad lived, to take pictures too. The officers continued taking more photographs the following day, and they found a smoldering bin by the side of his unit. It contained a partially burnt mobile phone, which was taken away to be examined and analyzed. It was later found to be Samaya's. Muhammad was interviewed again on the 28th of June at 14 minutes past midnight at Trafalgar House Police Station. He was asked again about Samaya's disappearance, but he provided no answers. The officers asked him if he really wanted to help find his niece. His response: "I've given my statement and there's no further comment." He was interviewed later again that day at 05:07 p.m. He reiterated he did not know where she was, and his lawyer told him he should make no further comments. The officers asked him about going to Binney Street despite the restraining order barring him from doing so. He said he had a good reason for going there, but refused to elaborate any further and answered no comment to all remaining questions. The magistrate granted the police a further 36 hours to question him, but they would later release him under investigation. On the 1st of July, investigators were back at Binney Street, and it was then that they found something that caught their eye. On a red metal table and the underside of the carpet in the living room, they found bloodstains. They were swabbed and sent away to be analyzed. They later came back as a match to Samaya. The officers continued to look at Muhammad and his movements on the day she had last been seen. On the 25th of June, he was captured on CCTV footage, having a key cut for the house on Binney Street, giving him the ability to let himself in. Again, this was a property that the restraining order stopped him from visiting. At 3:49 that day, he was back at Binney Street. CCTV recorded the raised voices of a man and a woman. It was also around this time that there was no more activity on Samaya's phone. Phone data showed that he had made internet surges to look for big rubble sacks. CCTV footage from the shipping container where he lived showed him reversing his Mitsubishi space wagon towards a container and locking it. The angle of the door blocked whatever it was he was doing from the view of the camera, but he was also wearing gloves. 11 days after she was reported missing, the discovery that people had been dreading was made. Samaya's body was found, tied up in a carpet and dumped on waste ground, left to decompose in the summer heat. A post-mortem was carried out. It was discovered that a 4-inch metal spike was lodged in her back. Her lung had been punctured as a result. The pathologist said that this was not in and of itself an immediate life-threatening injury if one were to seek medical assistance. But if someone failed to seek medical attention, it could be fatal, mainly due to the risk of infection. The pathologist said she was satisfied that there was evidence of trauma, including potential assault, prior to death, and that there was nothing evident in the post-mortem examination that suggested natural disease or natural illness. The home office pathologist was not able to determine exactly what Samaya's cause of death was due to the level of decomposition, especially around her head and neck, but the police said she had been subjected to a vicious and sustained attack. The news was devastating and many people were affected. The head of her course at Leeds Beckett University paid tribute to her, saying she was a dedicated student who was well liked by her peers and tutors. On the 6th of July at 9:10 p.m., officers arrived at Muhammad's address and he was rearrested, this time on suspicion of murder. It was now his 6th time being interviewed by the police, beginning at 4:41 p.m. on the 7th of July. He was told that the previous day the police had found the badly decomposing body of a woman, and although they were yet to identify her, they strongly believed it was Samaya they had found. He said he had no clue what they were talking about, and when asked if he was the one responsible for her death, he replied, "Definitely not." He was asked about his movements on the day she had last been seen and said he had just been driving around with nowhere to go in mind as he simply enjoyed driving. The officers asked if he had been driving around to try and find a place to dispose of Samaya's body. This was something he denied. Why had he parked so close to where her body would ultimately be found? He said it was a free country and he could park there if he wanted to, saying it bore no relevance that she would later be discovered there. Why had her phone also been found burning in a bin next to his unit? That could just be a coincidence, he said. He said he was really upset at the thought of a family member being treated in this way, explaining that he wasn't violent and he believed most people would describe him as a fantastic person. They questioned him as to why he had had a key cut to the property, and he told them it was because his mother had just had a heart attack, and it was not so he could go back to the house to remove Samaya's body. His 7th and final interview was conducted at 01:04 p.m. on the 8th of July. The officers played him the CCTV footage, and once again he had no comment to make. He was asked about the CCTV footage that showed him removing something heavy from his car. He said it was just rubbish. "All I know is this is a rubbish tip, so I thought it would be a good place to tip some rubbish," he said. He was quizzed about the metal spike that had been found lodged in Samaya's body, but he said he didn't know what it was. He told the police he thought they were obsessed with trying to put the blame on somebody to make it look like they had been doing their job, adding that he felt he was being forced to take the blame for something that he hadn't done. His protestations of innocence made no difference. He was charged with murder and remanded in custody. He would later appear in Crown Court on September the 20th via a video link from HMP Leeds to enter his plea. When asked what his plea was, he replied, "Not guilty, ma'am." He denied the charge of murder, but he did admit to perverting the course of justice and disposing of her body, as well as trying to destroy her phone. At Bradford Crown Court, Mohammed Taruz Khan went on trial, with Mr. Justice Gainham presiding. Prosecutor Jason Pitter said Samaya had met a traumatic death following a violent attack at her home. He said that her body was dumped and left to rot and decompose on wasteland like rubbish, such that she was not recognizable. His previous statements that he knew nothing about her death would later change in court. Mohammed's lawyer said that his client had been summoned to Binney Street to dispose of her body, adding he knew nothing about the death until after Samaya had been killed. Mohammed did not give evidence during the trial, and the prosecution said, "We say the proper inference to that is because he simply cannot answer because he is guilty." In terms of what Mohammed's motive could have been, it was put forward that this was so-called honor-based killing, rooted in the fact that Samaya had allegedly brought shame upon the family by refusing the marriage in Pakistan. Mohammed's lawyer said that his client would have no motive to kill Samaya and said that his brother, Samaya's father Yasin, would have a motive. Samaya's aunt said that Yasin had been humiliated and incandescent with rage after Samaya had reported him to the police over the forced marriage. But Yasin would not be there for the trial to hear any of this, as on the 8th of January, he had gone to Pakistan on a one-way ticket after entering into an Islamic divorce with his wife. Mohammed's lawyer said Yasin was completely controlling and cruel to his daughter Samaya. Her life must have been a living hell, a hell that was created by her father. But the prosecution were fighting back, arguing that Mohammed was not only responsible for disposing of her body, which he now admitted to, they were putting forward their evidence that he had killed her. The CCTV footage, the raised voices on said footage, him having the key cut, and the last communication on her phone, the prosecution said, whilst the prosecution cannot say precisely when Samaya was killed, you can conclude that something significant had happened around or shortly after that point, because there was no apparent further communication between Samaya and anyone else after that time. This coincided with her uncle arriving at the house. A detective constable would also testify. He had been in an interview room with Mohammed on the 29th of June. He said that Mohammed asked me what the sentence for someone in his position was. I explained murder could carry a life sentence. He went on to ask what the sentence was for the lesser offense of manslaughter. Again, I explained that that would be determined by a judge, with the facts of the case taken into account. He asked if it was true you only serve half your sentence in prison. I said that would depend on the judge. The prosecutor said these are sophisticated questions for someone who is innocent. They are not questions of an innocent man. They are questions knowing what he had done. With all of the evidence put before them following the 10-day trial, the jury deliberated for 9.5 hours over the course of 3 days. They then reached their verdict. The argument that Mohammed had just disposed of her body and not been responsible for her murder was rejected by the jury. Mohammed Taruz Khan was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years for the murder of his niece. He was also sentenced to 5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice, which he is to serve concurrently. Cries could be heard from the public gallery as the verdict was read out. Mr. Justice Garnam said, "Is not possible to identify a motive for this dreadful attack by you. It is pure speculation to consider whether this murder was part of some appalling family agreement. All that matters for present purposes is that the jury have found you guilty of the heinous crime of murder." When considering the aggravating factors in the case, the judge referred to the unlawful, disrespectful disposal of Samaya's body as one of the most serious aspects, saying, "Showed absolutely no respect for the dead body of your niece." When Mohammed was sentenced, the judge told him he was going to be an old man by the time he could apply for parole. Mohammed Taruz Khan will be 78 years old when he can apply for parole. For the officers who had investigated, this finally brought some closure to this appalling case. The senior investigating officer, Detective Superintendent Mark Bose, said, "Fatima Patel, family friend, spoke on behalf of Samaya's family outside court. She said, following Mohammed's sentence, it was announced that a challenge to it had been made. It was argued that it was unduly lenient and should be increased. This appeal went to the Attorney General, who disagreed and said the sentence was not unduly lenient and therefore it would not go before the Court of Appeal and the original sentence would stand. The outpouring of anger and shock following the murder of Samaya Begum was huge. Neighbors and local residents had been leaving flowers outside of the property, and a local councillor said that the community had been deeply affected by what had happened. Neighbors on Binney Street said that Dawood had been left so traumatized by what had happened to his niece. He was unable to go back to the property following her death. Samaya Begum was 20 years old and had her whole life in front of her. She had shown tremendous courage and bravery in going to the authorities and had only just found the independence and freedom that she had fought so hard for. Afra Qasim, the CEO and founder of Severa UK, another charity working to end so-called wonder-based abuse and violence, explained so eloquently why, in the wake of Samaya's death, this vital work must continue. The details of Samaya's death are harrowing. Samaya was a bright, brave woman who had the right to live freely, without fear. Today we remember her as the smart, courageous student she was while renewing our pledge to end honor-based abuse and harmful practices. We must be clear that honor-based abuse and harmful practices are not a part of culture or any religion, but violations of human rights. Culture is something beautiful to be celebrated, and is not an excuse for abuse. Our thoughts go out to those affected by Samaya's death, including her courageous family members who gave evidence during the trial. In her memory and in the memory of everyone lost to honor-based abuse, we will continue vital work to safeguard and advocate for those at risk and campaign to end honor-based abuse and harmful practices for good. Our case today takes us to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, home to 26-year-old Amara Banks and her children. Amara was known to everyone as Jerica, and she was mother to Zanaya, who was 5 years old, Kamaria, who was 4, and Arzel Jr., 21 months, whom everyone called Zell. Her ex, Arzel Ivory, was father to Zell and Zanaya, and was often around to see the children and take them to daycare, but the pair lived separately, with him being a few miles away. Jerica was from a big and close family with 5 brothers and sisters, and one of her brothers, David, said her whole life revolved around her children. She put them before everything and would work herself into the ground to give every penny she had to make sure they had everything they could want and need. Jerica was very talented and loved music, graduating from art school with honors and playing the violin very well. In the last couple of years, she had worked even harder to become more independent and break ties with Arzel. He told her family he wanted to marry her one day, but she said it wasn't going to work long term and there was nothing romantic there anymore. She said she only needed to talk to him when it came to the children. She had picked up extra hours working in the laundry room at the local hospital and had saved up every penny to get herself into a new apartment and start afresh with her children. Her girls Zanaya and Kamaria were said to be inquisitive and a bit cheeky, totally inseparable from each other, always wanting to dress the same and share everything. David said they were 2 peas in a pod. Sometimes you almost thought they were twins. Zell was always giggling and his sisters loved playing with him and carrying him around. But no sooner had she started on this new journey with her babies, tragedy hit Jerica and her family in a huge and unexpected way. Her son Zell passed away just short of his 2nd birthday due to complications of bronchitis. Jerica was inconsolable, but she threw everything she had into making sure he had the best send-off she could give him. She even set up a fund to help her pay for a Lion King-themed funeral for him. On February 7th, 2020, Zell's funeral was held. After the day was over, Jerica and her 2 daughters went back to Jerica's sister's house. Jerica had some wine and asked her sister Mika to drop her in the girls' home. The family made plans to get brunch together the next day, and Jerica said she would pick up her car at the same time. The 3 of them got back to the apartment at the 5900 block of North Sherman Boulevard in the early hours of the morning on what was now February 8, 2020. Just after 1:30 a.m., the silence of the apartment block was abruptly and chillingly broken. A resident heard and then saw a woman running through the parking lot. She had no shoes on, was bleeding from her mouth. She was screaming for whoever was chasing her not to kill her. Then she was gone and it went silent. Little did they know it was Jerica. Another neighbor also heard shouting at 1:51 a.m. She lived next door to Jerica and had heard thumping sounds against the wall. She said it sounded like someone being slammed against the wall or their head being smashed against it. She too had seen Jerica barefoot and shouting, and as she looked out of her window, she saw a man following her and drag her back inside, slamming the door behind them. 911 were called. On the phone, the neighbor said, "You can hear her screaming, you can hear it through the walls, I just need somebody to come check on her." He's over there beating the hell out of this girl." Police were at the apartment just 9 minutes later, but could not locate where the 911 call had come from. A couple of officers drove through the complex with their windows rolled down and then parked up for 10 minutes to watch. They said they couldn't see or hear anything that was indicative of an argument or domestic disturbance, and they drove away. The operator that had taken the call had classified it as a priority to call, which does not require an immediate response. The dispatcher did not pass on that the caller was living next door to where the noise was coming from, hence the reason nothing could be tracked when the officers arrived. A decision which multiple officials would later admit was completely the wrong thing to do. As the hours passed and brunch was coming up, Jerica's family were messaging and calling her, firstly to check on her and the girls, but also to see if the plans were still on. She was not answering the phone to anyone. Valeria, Jerica's mom, said her daughter was a creature of habit. You always knew where she was and what she was doing. She had a clockwork routine, so they all knew in their guts that something was wrong. Even with everything that had just happened, she would not have dropped off the radar. You just know when you know, and her family wasted no time filling out a missing persons report. Police were then finally able to determine that the call that had been made in the early hours of the morning was actually about Jerica. They entered her apartment to look around. There were no signs of a forced entry, but there was also no trace of her or her daughters anywhere, and all of their belongings were still there. They spotted a large hole in one of the bedroom walls. The comforter on one of the beds was missing, and they also found a napkin with what looked like drops of blood on it. But they said apart from this, nothing looked disturbed. Investigators soon determined that there had been no activity on her phone or social media accounts since she was dropped home that night, an immediate red flag for most people. Mika, Jerica's sister who had driven her in the girl's home that morning, said, "My sister, this is not like her. She don't run off. She don't ignore people. No matter what she goes through, she's gonna reach out to me." While her family and friends started searching and calling anyone and everyone they could think of, police managed to make contact with 25-year-old Arzel, Jerica's ex. It was now about 24 hours after Jerica was dropped home. Arzel told detectives that when he last spoke to her, she was understandably very upset about the funeral, and he had stayed for a while in her apartment before a fight broke out between them. He told her he wanted to sleep in his truck rather than the apartment, and Jerica had gone outside shouting about it. He had to coax her back inside, he said. Arzel said the fight had then subsided and he did head out to his truck to sleep before going to work the next day. He hadn't heard from her since. He said he had no idea where any of them could be, but added that he was going out of state for work and could talk to them properly the following week, but couldn't do anything for them right now. They found his reaction odd, and given the fact he worked as a local security guard, it seemed strange that he would suddenly be leaving to work hundreds of miles away to then drive all the way back. They were now wondering if this could be a case of abduction. AMBER stands for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response, and these alerts are activated in the most serious, endangered, missing, or child abduction cases. The aim is to instantly alert the community to assist in the search, and this is all broadcast through radio, TV, road signs, and cell phones. However, the problem was AMBER alerts are normally a very quick response and call to make, but in this instance it had now been almost a week since the girls had been seen. Given the fact that most AMBER alerts are resolved within hours because the response time is that prompt and there are many eyes and ears on it, it was not looking good. So much time had already been lost. Police Chief Alfonso Morales defended this decision, saying, he also said that Milwaukee police are only required to publicize information or photos if the missing person meets a narrow set of criteria related to age, health conditions, and mental state. He added that they were working relentlessly to find the three of them and would not stop until they did. Given that everything had just ramped up, officers returned to Jerica's apartment, this time with a cadaver dog, and in the girl's bedroom, the dog reacted very quickly. Forensic investigators then found the presence of human blood inside the girl's closet. In another room, the cadaver dog led investigators to a particular piece of carpet. When they pulled it up, they saw the floor underneath was absolutely covered in blood. It then became more obvious that a cleanup had been attempted and vast amounts of bleach were found all over. Given everything that the neighbors had reported hearing that night, coupled with what they had just found in the apartment, the situation was far more concerning than they had initially thought. The search had now been on for almost a week when police received a call from none other than Arzel's father. He lived in Memphis and said Arzel had just called him from there. This was 600 miles away from Milwaukee. During the phone call, his son had calmly confessed to killing Jerica, Kamaria, and Zanaya before buying a gun and setting off to Memphis to start a new life. Memphis authorities contacted Milwaukee police and a warrant was issued for Arzel's arrest and extradition, but they had no clue where the three were. When they finally caught up to him in Memphis, he was charged with aggravated battery. He was still pretty calm and told detectives what his dad said was true, and he would tell them what happened and where they could find the bodies. In a garage behind an apartment building in the 47th block of West Burleigh Street, close to where he had lived, police found the charred bodies of Jerica, Zanaya, and Kamaria. There had been an attempt to dismember them. They had all been set on fire after they were dead. Autopsies would later confirm that all three had been strangled. Arzel Ivory's charges were immediately upgraded to 3 counts of intentional homicide and 1 count of aggravated battery. There was not yet any indication of how he would plead. Valerius said that if it wasn't for his father turning him in, they might never have known what had happened. It was a devastating outcome. Police said that between 2018 and 2020, domestic violence-related deaths had increased by 400%. And this particular case further highlighted that more support and resources needed to be put in place. Jerica and all her children were now gone, for lives lost in the space of a month. The knock-on effect to so many was huge. A GoFundMe was set up to help cover the funeral costs, with the Milwaukee mayor calling the case horrific. He said, as a parent, as a person, you just have to be shocked by the brutality of it. During an interview, he gave police the grisly timeline of what had happened. He said since the pair lost their baby son, the couple's relationship had really broken down. And more than that, he said Jerica had blamed him for the death of Zell. Zell had been born with severe respiratory issues, a constant concern for Jerica. He was even scheduled to have surgery to remove his tonsils to help with his breathing. Arzel had tried to drop him at daycare, but they would not take him because he was too sick. He would not eat any food either that day or take his medicine. Arzel had tried to wake him up from a nap, but said he wasn't moving and was making weird gasping sounds. Instead of calling 911 or Jerica, he waited more than an hour before putting a now almost unconscious Zell in the car and going to pick up the girls from daycare. By the time he arrived, baby Zell had slumped to his side, lying against the door. Arzel said he drove around some more, unsure as to what to do. He stopped to buy some snacks, and it was only after this did he go to the hospital. But it was too late. Nurses said Zell was blue and unresponsive, and they could not find a pulse. It had now been 2.5 hours since our Zell had noticed he had stopped breathing properly. And at 5:17 p.m., just months short of his 2nd birthday, he was pronounced dead. Jerica was as angry as she was upset and said she could never forgive him for not doing something and just ignoring what was happening to their baby. Her family agreed and would later say he took 4 family members' lives, not 3. At Zell's funeral, Jerica had been very selective about who she wanted to speak and had asked her mother Valeria to give a speech. As she went to stand up, Arzel hurried to the front and just started talking. Jerica did not react as she knew it wasn't the right time. But her family said she was absolutely livid that he could even stand up there, let alone talk. After the funeral, Arzel said he went to work, and when he went to Jerica's apartment at 1:30 a.m., she was angry and upset. She had shouted at him that he did not care about Zell and had caused his death and told him she couldn't even face looking at him. Arzel told officers she was just making a scene. He claimed she got a knife and cut his wrist, and then he had grabbed her and slammed her head into the wall twice. This was the hole that police had first spotted when they went in and what the neighbor had heard happening through the wall. She had started bleeding from her mouth and made an attempt to escape, but he dragged her back into the apartment and proceeded to strangle her with both hands. He coldly said it seemed that Jerica was not fighting him back, so he figured that she wanted to die and he was just helping her with this. He told detectives that he didn't want the children to live without their mother, so he had to kill them too. He kissed both girls and told them, "Daddy loves you," and that Mommy wanted them in heaven with her, before strangling them as well. He had planned to dismember all 3 of them, but changed his mind after he saw a bone. likely where the pool of blood had come from. He then wrapped their bodies up and took them to his car. While he was driving around Milwaukee wondering what to do, he remembered that his old apartment building had a 4-car garage, and one of the locks was broken. He headed there to hide their bodies, and tried to light them on fire. But the flames did not appear hot enough, so he went into a gas station for some gasoline, returned to the garage, poured it everywhere, and set it alight. He then bought the gun and fled to Memphis. The sheer calmness in the way he described doing this was quite staggering to the officers. Arzel said that it was his family, and as he had brought his children into the world, he could take them out of it if he wanted. Despite his shocking admission, he still pleaded not guilty and was held on a $750,000 bond. He then changed his plea to not guilty by reason of mental illness. But after many assessments in September 2020, a doctor ruled there was not enough evidence to support this, and it was thrown out as a defense. So in April 2021, Arzel Ivory changed his plea again to guilty of 3 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Under state law, he faced a mandatory life sentence, and the only question for the judge was whether he should ever be allowed to petition for release on extended supervision. His attorney detailed Arzel's schizophrenia diagnosis and past attempts to take his own life, and requested the judge allow him to petition for extended supervision after serving 40 years in prison. Before his sentence was handed down, Arzel said, many of Jerica's family members gave victim impact statements in court, including her brother David and mother Valeria. Arzel's attorney's request of the possibility of an early release after 40 years of confinement was denied by the judge. She also ordered him to undergo mental health and drug abuse therapy. There were also so many questions about how the 911 call was initially handled and what, if anything, could have and should have been done differently. People questioned why it had taken so long for the media to become aware of the case too. The story had taken a while to start circulating, and that was only because Jerica's family were calling the stations and not forgetting the Amber Alert, which was issued a week after as well. When the media reached out to the police to inquire about the case, they were told it was not a critical missing persons case. The internal investigation found that the 911 dispatcher had missed out vital information when logging the call made by the neighbor, which had resulted in a lack of urgency to chase anything up. The operator resigned before the investigation was complete, and she took a job as a prosecutor in the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office, before resigning from that as well. Michael Brunson, the acting police chief of the area at the time, fired the 2 officers that went to the apartment that morning for failing to conduct a thorough and complete investigation at the time. The officers appealed and got their jobs back. The panel of commissioners then issued suspensions instead, 30 days for the more experienced officer and 15 days for the lesser. During the hearing, an attorney said, in this case, these officers will never know what they might have been able to accomplish if they'd been given accurate information. Considering looking back at the day in question, could things have been handled differently? My answer is yes, one of the suspended officers said. The other one added, I've played the what-if game inside my head many times since this incident, wondering if I could have done anything that could have changed the outcome of what happened. This is something I must live with. On Jerica's last day, she was enduring the pain of losing her baby boy, who she said had such a painful and poorly short life, no matter how much she tried to help him. And just a few hours later, she too was fighting for her life, and for Zanaya and Kamaria, who we will never know if they saw what happened to their mother, suffered an equally terrifying fate. The Banks family must live with a pain that is hard to comprehend. Mika, Jerica's sister, said she lives with so much guilt. I gotta deal with it every day that I took her home, and now I will never see her again. In a touching tribute, the Banks family started working with the Sojourner Family Peace Center in Milwaukee. Sojourner is a non-profit organization that provides an array of support to nearly 8,000 people every year. They help families affected by domestic violence achieve safety, justice, and a brighter future. They made plans to commission a stained glass window to be installed there. The glass will depict Jerica, Zanaya, and Kamaria walking into the sunlight together. The city of Macon in central Georgia. Today we meet 27-year-old Lauren Giddings. Born to parents Karen and Bill, Lauren had 2 other sisters, Sarah and Caitlin, and she was the oldest. They were very close and said that the real star of the family was Lauren's dog Butterbean. Lauren had always been driven, and her dream was to become a public defender. In the spring of 2008, she made the move from Maryland to Macon, Georgia to pursue this. Residents in Macon say it is slow and relaxing. Everybody is welcoming. You never meet a stranger, and it's generally a quiet and peaceful place to live and study. Lauren gelled with her new home instantly. She was in a long-distance relationship with David Van Diver, a corporate lawyer, and they had met at his Atlanta law firm 4 years before. Even though she was 2 decades his junior, they had so much in common, and David said she was wise beyond her years. They clicked right away, shared the same work ethic, the same dry but also silly sense of humor, and they supported each other through some very challenging personal and professional times. David said she was outspoken, intelligent, and very level-headed. Lauren even managed to charm his very protective older sister. Something he joked was impressive, as nobody had managed to do that before. Little did Lauren know, David was planning on proposing to her. He had already chosen the perfect spot. However, the vast distance between them since her move had made things hard, and they briefly broke up. Lauren had started seeing another student called Joe, but she quickly realized she still loved David a lot and really wanted to make it work. So she called things off with Joe, and he was pretty upset, but they did remain good friends. Flash forward to June 2011, and Lauren had just graduated from one of the oldest law schools in the United States, Mercer University's School of Law. Naturally, her dog Butterbean was there to watch her graduate, as was David and her whole family. Lauren was now looking forward to taking everything she had learned and throwing herself into the next chapter. The next big step was passing the Georgia bar exam, and every spare second she had was going into prepping. After graduation, she attended her sister Caitlin's wedding back in Maryland and told people after this she really needed time to knuckle down and focus on her work. The family all knew it was the last time they'd be together for a while, and this made Caitlin's big day even more special. Like many students after graduation, Lauren had opted to stay in Macon instead of going back to Baltimore. She lived on the second floor of the Barristers Hall, Unit 2. Barristers Hall was a place built exclusively for law students, and it was situated directly across from the campus. Still being able to go in and talk to lecturers and use the library while she was studying for the bar just meant it made sense for her to stay there a while longer. Back at her apartment, though, her safe and quiet space soon felt very different. Lauren had spoken to her sister about something that she couldn't prove and knew sounded strange, but was convinced was happening. She could feel things were being moved around, like someone was coming into her apartment. When she got home after being out, there was a weird energy she couldn't explain. She felt someone was watching her, but there had been no signs of a forced entry, so she had no idea how this could be happening. This uneasy feeling she had not subsided, and on June 25, 2011, late into the evening, she sent an email to David about her concerns. David told her not to worry, and said it was probably just some hoodlums messing about but not actually intent on doing anything, and she was working hard and not really leaving her apartment much, so it was possible she had been going a little stir-crazy without realizing. Lauren sent out a mass message which read in part, "Hey guys, I'm hunkering down to study for the bar. Please don't be offended if I don't respond to texts or emails." And in the following days, no one heard anything from her. Apart from going to church and making time for the occasional workout, she was doing little else apart from reading. So a few unanswered messages or phone calls was not something that was immediately alarming. But her best friend, Katie, and her sister, Caitlin, had repeatedly tried to check in with her, but were being met with silence. Caitlin was on her honeymoon and sharing photos, and it was strange that she wasn't replying to any of them. It didn't feel that she was just focusing on other things. It started to feel like something was wrong. A fellow student, Ashley, got a call from Caitlin asking her to stop by her apartment and check in. Before Ashley went, she tried calling her too, but Lauren's phone was now going straight to voicemail. Ashley and her boyfriend pulled up at her apartment and noted that Lauren's car was still parked outside. Using a spare key, they let themselves in. Lauren's belongings were sort of strewn everywhere, but this didn't seem that odd because she was due to move out and move in with David. But when they saw her calendar and realized the date, she was actually supposed to move out the very next day, June 30th. Then they found Lauren's purse, law books, cell phone, and laptop. Things everybody could agree she would never have just disappeared without taking. So where was she? Ashley called some friends and people she knew lived in the same complex. Even Lauren's ex Joe started searching the university, and everyone else was looking nearby. The consensus was the last time anyone had heard anything from her was at an end-of-year party 4 days ago. But she had left the morning after and everything was fine, and a few hours later, she had emailed David talking about her worries being in the apartment. The following morning, with still no luck, it was time to call the police, and her family set off on the almost 12-hour drive to Georgia to help. At 9 a.m., officers got to number 2, the barrister's hall. Right away, they noted that there were no signs of a forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and nothing seemed to have been stolen. But they could all agree that something was definitely wrong. They started combing through her rooms, and one of the first things they did was use a spray luminol to see if there were any traces of blood. Everything was coming up clean, but when they used it in Lauren's bathroom, the result was very different. Her bath had clearly been full of blood. Police believed they were now looking for Lauren's body. June 30th was a hot day with a strong breeze, and as they moved their search outside to form a new plan, a big gust of wind came along which forced a smell in their direction. They were stood near some bins, and a distinctive odor stopped them in their tracks. It was undoubtedly the smell of human decomposition. One officer said, "While we were standing there, the wind started to turn. We all smell things in life that smell bad, and that smell of a body or a decomposing body is one of the worst things you'll smell." Police opened the lids and made a grisly discovery that would stick with them forever. It was a female torso wrapped in a black bag. Testing needed to be done, but given the fact Lauren was missing and the luminol results from her bathroom, they strongly felt that it was a part of her body. I had never seen anything like that before. Who could have done this? Because truthfully, only a monster could do something like that. It was absolutely horrible, one detective said. In a weird twist of fate, the police cars being parked near the entrance had stopped the trash removal van from getting in to empty everything. If the police hadn't been there at that moment blocking things off, everything would have been gone by the time they'd started searching. As suspected, testing confirmed it was Lauren Giddings' torso. The chief medical examiner would later confirm that there were no signs of sexual assault, but could not confirm a cause of death. They did believe she had been killed and dismembered on June 26th. Lauren's apartment, especially the bathroom, was now being dusted for fingerprints and the likes, but it looked like there had been a pretty thorough cleanup done and only luminol was picking anything up. They had cornered off everything outside and were trying to keep what they had found under wraps. If it was someone in the complex, they didn't want to alert them to the fact that they had just found her, in case this caused anyone to run or hide more evidence. One officer said, "You have to look at who is closest to the victim, either romantically or geographically." The people involved in the initial search, Ashley, Joe, and the others, were all asked to come in and give statements. They also spoke with her partner David, but he was not only devastated. He had been away on a golfing trip in California and his alibi checked out. It was quite obvious that he was not at all involved. Lauren's ex Joe was much the same and was quickly ruled out. The authorities were keen to search every home in the block so they could start eliminating people. Everybody was happy to do this. Everybody apart from one person, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel. So why would this be an issue, they wondered. It's the lawyer in me. I'm just always protective of my space, he said. He was a fellow law student, also prepping for the bar exam, and had been living next door to Lauren since the first year of law school. Number 4. He had actually been there in the initial searches for Lauren, walking around with her friends and someone they had asked to come to the station a few hours before. They continued to search the rest of the block but kept their eye on him. His behavior was looking odd. He was both refusing to help with anything but at the same time loitering around and making sure he was involved with everything. Stephen stayed there all day, watching everything everyone was doing, and walking around after the police as they were in and out of other people's homes. He was raising eyebrows, even more so when the media started interviewing people. He was one of the first people to talk to them and gave his theories about what could have happened to Lauren. At this point, only a few people knew about what they had found in the bin. And after the interview was over, Stephen sat for ages just staring into space. A few hours later, he finally let the police into his apartment. He was stockpiling food, energy drinks, and lots of various weapons too. They looked through the drawers and found a variety of things, including some condoms. When police pulled them out, Stephen mumbled something about being a virgin and saving himself for marriage. He started talking to them about being on the dating site eHarmony, but said he wasn't having much luck with getting dates. He was acting so oddly. And when police asked why he had the condoms, he muttered something about breaking into 2 neighboring apartments and randomly deciding to steal them. With his own admission that he had been breaking into other people's homes, just feet away from where Lauren had lived, police arrested him for burglary and brought him in for further questioning. Although he had been keen to talk to the media and know everything that was going on, he was now totally silent. There were inconsistencies with what he was saying and was reluctant to answer things. It was mainly yes, no, or I don't know. As well as this, his mannerisms were strange. Police said they hadn't seen anyone respond this way in an interview before. He sat almost perfectly still the whole way through, barely even moving his head, with officers having to ask him to look them in the eyes from time to time. The interview footage sped up, highlights just how eerily still he sits, and how unusual it looks in comparison to the officer's natural demeanor. Even when detectives left the room, he remained in the same position, staring straight ahead. His constant repeating of no and I don't know was now starting to grate on Detective Patterson. There was no doubt in his mind that this was the person behind the awful thing that had happened to Lauren. But it was now past midnight and they were no further forward in getting answers. Stephen also revealed he had 2 scratches just above his hip as well. As the interview progressed, Stephen's apartment was being turned upside down. Investigators found that he somehow had a master key to get into every room in the complex. They found the packaging for a hacksaw and several flash drives, which later turned out to have graphic and disturbing images and videos of children on them, and a pair of underwear that, once tested, came back to Lauren Giddings. A look into his search history showed he was often on her social media profiles, and he would be searching these at the same time he was looking up and watching violent pornography. They found he had written blogs about torturing and killing women too, sharing his depraved fantasies on forums. It was all disturbing, and given the amount of searches he had made for Lauren's name, he was clearly obsessed with her. One of his last and latest searches was for Macon's trash collection times. In the maintenance room in the complex, they found the hacksaw that matched the packaging found in his apartment. There was blood on it. CCTV had confirmed it was him buying the hacksaw too. They also found a bloody sheet, and both of these came back to Lauren. The maintenance worker had already been ruled out, and the only other person that somehow had a key to get into this room was Stephen. This was Lauren's killer. But who was Stephen McDaniel, and why on earth had he done this? Classmates of Stephen said he was uncomfortable to be around, very awkward and difficult to talk to. He would ask people weird things about death, fixating on a zombie apocalypse and committing the perfect murder. He would quiz people on how they would, hypothetically, kill someone and cover it up. In school, Stephen was actually voted most likely to be famous. His fellow law students said he definitely thought he was the smartest person in the room, smarter than everyone and arrogantly so. Always ready for a debate even if he was totally wrong, he would bicker with everyone, Lauren included, and other students said he was quite happy to disagree and argue. He wasn't there to make friends. That was clear, one person said. They, along with their teachers, said he was an average student. He wasn't someone that really stood out in any way, but he sure spoke like he did. Now he was finally coming to the end of his time at university, and he was unsure as to where to go next. He was finishing school with no friends and no future plans. He was somewhat adrift. From the minute they started living next door in 2008, Lauren had really tried hard to be his friend and be supportive. She even stopped to introduce him to her mother Karen when they saw he was hurriedly walking alone around the complex. Karen met him again on the eve of their graduation. There was something about him, she said. After she spoke to him for the second time, she couldn't help but think of him living next to Lauren. I thought it was odd that he always kept the windows and curtains closed. You never saw him, she said. But as nice as Lauren was trying to be, he had the same effect on her that he did on most people. He just made her feel uncomfortable. In an email that Lauren wrote to David in 2008, the same year she moved in, she spoke about Stephen's behavior and wrote about butting heads with him in class. She said, "Got the stink eye. He's out to get me." But Stephen had definitely taken a shine to Lauren. and had asked her to go out on a date a few times, but as well as being in a relationship, she just wasn't interested in him like that. From this point on, she was only being polite if she saw him, but was definitely keeping her distance. With everything they had found, on August 2nd, 2011, Stephen McDaniel was charged with the murder of Lauren Giddings. He was also later charged with 7 counts of child sexual exploitation too. Despite his lawyers requesting his bail be set at $100,000, it was set at almost $1 million. A grand jury indicted him on 1 count of murder, and once all of his devices had finally been analyzed, 30 counts of child exploitation too. Although everything against him was really strong, the prosecution did note that it was still a largely circumstantial case. Apart from the underwear, there was nothing tying his DNA to her. Nothing of his was found in the bathroom, and none of his DNA was on the hacksaw either. In terms of the underwear, he could potentially explain it away as something he stole, just as he had done with the condoms. They still could not prove a cause or time of death either. But nonetheless, they were confident and ready to take him to trial. More evidence would soon be brought to their attention, which really did cement everything, and it was chilling to watch. On a memory card taken from his apartment, they found a video which proved that Stephen had been stalking Lauren for quite some time. Her feelings and worries about someone watching her and breaking in were not unfounded at all. On the same night Lauren was murdered, he had been filming her home through the window. He had taken a wooden pole which he had duct taped a camera to the end of, and then held the pole up to be able to see into her rooms through her blinds. Prosecutor David Cook said the second he saw this, he said, "That's the guy." A few days later, hundreds of people filled out the St. Mary of the Mills Church for Lauren's funeral. Despite the best efforts of everyone, it was still only her torso that had been recovered, so that was all they could bury that day. Stephen McDaniel pleaded not guilty, and the defense were preparing to position the idea that the police were framing him and had entered his apartment many times to plant things. In another twist, one of Stephen's defense attorneys who briefly worked with him had actually been one of Lauren's teachers in a transitionary course from law school into law practice. He said he had admired Lauren and enjoyed teaching her, but one thing he did remember was that she was opposed to the death penalty. So, knowing that the prosecution were already pushing for this, he was pushing to throw it out. As everybody prepared for what would be a very tough trial, the prosecution agreed to drop the child sexual exploitation charges and offered him a plea deal, and this meant Stephen, with the advice of his lawyers, had a change of mind. In April 2014, just a week before the trial was due to start, Stephen McDaniel finally pleaded guilty to killing and dismembering Lauren. One of his old attorneys said, "The case took a turn for the worse for McDaniel when the computer evidence started coming out, and it just kept coming. They were continuing to find more evidence related to his computer and camera, and finally he agreed that was enough to get a conviction." Before he was set to be sentenced, the prosecution presented the evidence which attested to his character. They showed the recording of Lauren's home and read out some of Stephen's alleged forum posts, one of which read, "Graduate from law school. Party hard by drinking alone in front of my computer. See my sexy neighbor/classmate come home late. Invite her up for a nightcap. Make her a special drink called a Mickey Finn. A drink designed to knock someone unconscious. She's out cold. I finally lose my V-card. Oh no, she's OD'd and died. I barbecued her legs and arms to celebrate losing my V-card. Not into organ meat, but threw her torso out. Lose this on TV while the cops are discovering her remains. You mad virgins." However, the legitimacy of this came into dispute, as some people claimed it was someone trolling online, and although the prosecution firmly believe it was him, it does remain up for discussion. As part of his plea deal, he had to admit to the court what he had done that day, and this was what he said happened. At around 4:30 a.m., he unlocked her door using the master key. He was wearing all black with gloves and a mask. He said he stood watching her sleep, but she must have felt something was wrong as she woke up abruptly. Before she could get out of bed or even process what was happening, he leapt onto her and put his hands around her throat. The pair struggled and fell onto the floor. He said Lauren grabbed his mask and pulled it off, and when she realized it was him, she called his name and screamed at him to stop. She cried and tried to fight him off for almost 15 minutes as he was strangling her, before she ultimately stopped breathing. He dragged her into the bathroom and put her into the tub. He left her there for the rest of the night and following day, and on the evening of June 27th he returned with some tools, including a hacksaw, and proceeded to dismember her, which he described in graphic detail. He put parts of her into different bags, which he said he dumped in bins around the university campus, but her torso he put into the bin next to the apartment block, thinking it would be taken shortly. He cut up his mask, gloves, and shirt, and flushed them down the toilet. The medical examiner had revealed there were no signs of a sexual assault, and Stephen said he had not sexually assaulted Lauren. She was wearing pink running shorts when she died, and I never removed them. They were found on her torso just as I had left them, he told the court. Even though it had now been almost 3 years, people still couldn't believe it. Lauren had been nothing but friendly and kind to him from the second she met him, something Stephen acknowledged too. He claimed from that night on he was in a dreamlike delusional state, and had convinced himself that Lauren was still alive. He said, "It's difficult for me to explain why I killed Lauren and attempted to conceal my deed the way I did. I know that it was very wrong. I am not delusional or without all morals or decency. Something in my makeup, my psychology, my neuropathy, my own particular pathology perhaps must explain it." He told the family he was sorry and grieves for Lauren every day but doesn't expect forgiveness from them. "There is no way I can ever deserve it. If I could take back what happened, I would," he said. The only reason the prosecution did not end up seeking the death penalty was because Lauren herself was so against it. Her family respected that and said they hoped he lived a long life in the worst possible way in prison. Stephen McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole until 2041. After he was sentenced, from prison he wrote a lengthy letter claiming he had been the victim of police intimidation and his case from the start had been unfair. He demanded a new and, in his eyes, fair trial. So 4 years later, he filed an appeal where he represented himself and called more than 10 people to be interviewed, including his old lawyer whom he was seeking damages against. In his complaint, Stephen asked the court to award damages from his lawyer in the amount of $50,000 for legal fees and another $250,000 in punitive damages his lawyer's alleged negligence. He also filed a motion against Bibb County Judge Howard Sims, claiming he had shown prejudice towards him. This appeal was denied. The now 37-year-old filed another appeal again in 2022, which claimed that the prosecution had stolen documents, his rights had been violated, and his lawyers were incompetent. He was requesting his conviction be overturned and he be released from prison. Stephen's dad Mark stood behind this and said, "We're hoping that the truth comes out. That's all we're hoping." But the judge said he could not even consider this appeal as he filed it over a year late. And this was also denied. Had McDaniel exercised reasonable diligence, rather than blindly assuming the Georgia Supreme Court was to blame, he would have realized that his motion was untimely, the judge added. Stephen has already filed another appeal and this is still ongoing. Some of Stephen's family and friends still believe he is innocent, and his dad even started a GoFundMe to help with his legal fees, but it raised nothing and the page was quickly removed. Lauren's sister Caitlin called it pathetic and delusional. His grandfather Hollis, before he died, gave an interview about visiting him in jail. He said, "You feel like picking him up and taking him to the doctor, but he's grown, he's not a little boy, so it just breaks your heart. You have to accept what is in front of you whether you like it or not. I did what I thought was right at the time to get him a lawyer immediately. I thought I'd go over there and pay his bail and then take him home, but my God, when I saw him, he just looked different." His mother Glenda defended him as well and seemed certain that at the time he was arrested he was innocent. "I have a big hug for him when he gets out and he has one for me," she said, adding that she has visions of him becoming a Supreme Court justice one day. But as far as the police, prosecution, and Lauren's family were concerned, the trial was over and the correct decision had been made all those years ago. Lauren's sister Caitlin said it seemed like she might have been one of the people who was actually nice to him and gave him some attention even though he might have been a loner. "There's no story here about telling your kids to lock their car when they get in or don't go to this side of town. You know, there's no, she shouldn't have done this and it wouldn't have happened. Because you should always be nice to people. You should always be nice to your neighbors. Just because someone looks different doesn't mean they are. But in this case, he just was." Detectives believe they stopped a serial killer in the making, a predator and a danger to children that day. Once voted most likely to become famous when he was younger, he is now infamous in one of the most shocking crimes the community had ever seen. The police praised Lauren's family and friends for being so quick, and they acknowledged that if the trash collection services had emptied the bin where her torso was located, the case may have gone cold and they might have never caught Stephen. Investigators also believe that Stephen has never been entirely truthful about what happened, and there is more to the story. "I'm sure there are things he'll never tell anyone," said Detective David Patterson. Lauren's sister Sarah added, "Obviously we know she died, but we don't really believe anything Stephen McDaniel has said. I don't think he is a very honest person. I think he can make up a million stories. He has a very vivid imagination." They continue to search for Lauren's remains, believing they might even be in a 62-acre area owned by one of Stephen's family members. Although he is eligible for parole in 2041, legal experts think he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Lauren's family celebrate every milestone and every event she should have been there for, as if she is there and joining in. They also organize runs in her memory every year too. Her sister Caitlin named her baby girl, Lauren Magnolia, after her. May can have 2 memorial plaques dedicated to her, and these can be found at Mercer Law School and on a pink bench in Washington Park, in Mercer's downtown district, somewhere she loved to run. Lauren's family also established the Lauren Teresa Giddings Scholarship. In the law firm where she briefly trained, Lauren was always known for wearing bright colors, especially pink. They even named Wednesdays Pink Wednesdays after her, joking that she was like Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. A close friend of hers said that her choice of color in a famously monochromatic working environment always made people smile, as well as started a conversation. She immersed herself in a profession that's known for black pinstripes. Pink was her way of saying, "Bring it on to the world," she said. And friends said that that summed Lauren Giddings up. She made herself hard to miss and was unapologetic about it. Driven a go-getter and ready to take on anything that came her way, Caitlin said it's not like she doesn't exist in our lives. She does. It's just very different. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.